becoming a polyglot and how the school system can slow down your language learning progress. That sounds like it could be good. That sounds like exactly what I'm all about. We're gonna check this out. This is Laura Maliszewska. I've not heard of her before, but title's promising. Oh, I had this on mute. No wonder there was no audio.
People don't understand that the whole learning experience in school, how it has been, and how the
Hello, Darkline. Welcome and thanks for the follow. What we're doing today is playing Clan O'Connell, and then each time I level up, we're looking at some language-related videos and talking language stuff. And if you have language learning questions or thoughts or something like that, and you want to mention them, you're welcome to do it. We do all sorts of things here. Let me just make sure, yeah, that crop is the way I want it. I'm not bad. Where are you joining us from? How'd you find me, apart from everything else? Because so few people do find me that I'm always curious.
Has programmed ourselves to have a certain belief system, right? So you're a linguist as well, and you're highly educated in that field. How do you look at this moment? Like now, if you have for yourself,
gonna have to find out more about this Speakly podcast. If it's a language podcast and they bring on people, yeah, I might want to see about going on that. That might be interesting.
A successful language learning strategy, and we will dive into this a little later.
Küçük biliyorum. Şimdi öğreniyorum. Konuştuğumdan iyi okuyabiliyorum.
Of what it is and stuff like that, but how
Memleket
do
nereli?
you look back at what language learning was in school, and it actually is today? Nothing has changed, right?
No, it hasn't changed a bit. Maybe now because of the pandemic, everything is online, but I think it's even worse because nobody was prepared for it. But
oh, this is a very recent video. Okay, I was wondering. This is just from yesterday. Diyarbakır. Kurmancı biliyor musun? Kurmancı da öğrenmek istiyorum.
just in general, I was so lucky that I had amazing teachers. Like, I have no idea how it happened. I was just surrounded by the best teachers up to a point, because when I entered university, I had the worst French teacher. But I had, for the majority of the time, I had amazing teachers. And as I said, I was curious and I was adventurous and I just wanted to speak. But I was one of a kind, and I was also talented, so I have a very different perspective. But I taught many people, and I know that the schooling system can really, like, how should I put it? It can demonize learning languages, because first of all, you have this classroom environment where you can't help but compare your skills against other people's skills.
Yeah.
And if you're just learning something and you're just discovering whether you like something or not, let's say you're learning Russian, because that was my case in middle school. So I was learning Russian for a semester, and I thought that it would be easy because my mother knew Russian and my father knew Russian, and I thought I would be good at Russian. But I couldn't feel that I was so good at it. Like, I didn't grasp it very quickly. It took me.
Yeah, and I have to say, having had the experience of learning languages the way school systems do, at the same time as also I've always been teaching myself through the methods that I've just found, over time work best for me. That people were often shocked, like when I was at school and at uni, at how badly I would often do in these classes, because they were just doing things In ways that were completely foreign to my way of actually learning things, and it would often be like the reading material was boring as shit, and so I mean that's just never worked for me, and I get the impression when I've occasionally done like tutoring and helping people get through their language classes in schools and unis and things like that. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've done it, but you know, I've often find that really what was causing them the most problems was the methods that they were being taught by. Is the methods just don't really work the way our brains work when they're trying to work out a language.
I mean, a bit of it, like, it was a challenge for me. But because I kept getting like slightly like good grades, I was okay with that. But the children that were getting like worse grades than me, they started hating Russian and the Russian teacher who was okay at the time.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, if the methods aren't working for you, and this is like the school kind of puts this trip on you where it's like this is just the way to learn this stuff, and so people come away from that a lot of the time with the feeling that they just aren't any good at it, and it's extremely discouraging and completely and utterly unnecessary because that's just not how any of this works.
And I think that when you have this classroom environment and you look at other children or maybe students when you are at the university and you look at each other's skills and you think and you say to yourself, oh my god, I'm so much worse than them, that's the first issue because the teachers don't really encourage progress or they don't create, I think for the most part, they don't create a healthy learning environment so that they say, hey, it doesn't matter who speaks better, who speaks worse.
Yeah, because the whole thing is based on marks. It's based on grading. And so there's this evaluation, and it's an evaluation that is supposedly telling you how good you are at Russian, for example, in her case. But really what it's telling you is how effective the methods that by which you are supposed to be learning it are. But they don't tell you that. They tell you it's how good you are. And the result is just, it's really quite harmful to actually even having an interest in languages. So many people, I end up talking about this with people a lot because people ask me what I do. I'm a translator and I do a language related stream and stuff like that. And so they're, oh wow, what languages? And then I give my list of them and it's a long one. They're like, holy shit. And they're like, oh, I'm no good with languages, you know me. I'm just not really good at them. And it's like, well, you probably have absolutely no idea because you've almost certainly gotten that impression from these useless methods that are used in school. And if you were to try it by some other means, if you were going to try it by methods that have a lot more to do with what decades of research now say are the effective ways of learning language, which is to say, comprehensible input that is really, really interesting to you, that it's so interesting to you that you can actually forget it's in another language, then you might find that you're actually really picking it up. You might find that you're actually a lot better at this than you thought you were, than school told you were.
They're all here to learn. Instead, they have tests and they have programs that they have to follow, the curriculum.
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
all
bullshit.
Based on the the teacher has to make progress with the program, and so the learners are
because the teacher is often being evaluated based specifically on these test scores, and which means that there's an incentive to be teaching to these tests. The tests are useless. So many people in like the language community online always on about, oh, I'm going to take the JLPT, I'm going to take the Goethe Institute test, whatever they call that, I forget. I'm going for A1, going for like B2, whatever. And it's like, these standardized tests only really test your test-taking ability. Just because you don't do well on one of these tests does not mean anything about how well you actually know the language. If you didn't know anything about the language, you probably would not get far. But just because you do badly on the tests does not mean that you actually that reflects necessarily on your ability in the language. It reflects mostly on your ability with standardized tests, which is a pointless skill to have. It is because there's literally only one time you're ever going to use it, and it's with these bullshit tests.
To catch up with everyone, and if they feel or they see that they are behind everyone else, they will not start liking the language. They will feel like they are horrible at learning languages. They will feel like they are not making progress fast enough. And this is like, I think I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg here, but I think that this is one of the biggest problems, the environment in which we learn, and the fact that we start learning at school, which is basically a competitive environment, and then the teacher sometimes doesn't know how to encourage the positive learning environment. And then there are the methods and the tests, and I could go on forever on this.
Yeah, it's
For
true.
sure.
It is
It's a funny
easy to go
thing.
on forever
I've
because it
been
just sucks on so many different
communication
levels.
with a lot of education ministries in several countries, and what they tell me regarding why teachers are pacing learners through some curriculum, just no, we have to be in pace of finalizing this book, this learning manual, for example.
Yeah.
Then it actually isn't true. Just
And
teachers
the book
believe
sucks.
that it's true.
I don't
but
even need to
the
know what the
only thing
book
that
is. It probably
written
sucks.
in national, international and national curriculums
Yeah,
is that
I heard that too.
you need to be on a certain level. I imagine when I'm looking at such an environment like school environment, then I can only imagine how a scientist, a climate scientist, for example, is watching what's happening in the world at the moment, right? So it's like it's so it just drives you mad in a way, but this whole mammoth is so big that you don't know where to begin because it just takes time, which all innovation does, to change it, because there are
And
so
the
many.
problem,
There are
the
so
thing is, this isn't in the sense that like with climate science, he's talking about the innovations to try to get the carbon out of the atmosphere and shit like that. And the thing there is, we know a lot less about that than we need to. With language learning, we know a lot more about. We know way more. Like we know at this point pretty well how you can get pretty much anybody, unless they've got some sort of learning disability, in which case it is probably going to be more complicated, especially if it's a specifically language-related disability. Then you'd probably have to modify methods somewhat depending on what exactly is going on. But most people could probably develop. I mean, let me just say, if they were told how to do it based on the available research that we have, and we have lots of it. We have huge amounts of it at this point. We've got like 40 years of research pointing in basically the same direction. Pretty much anyone could probably come away having at least some understanding of a language they're interested in if they had the materials that were right for them. I mean, there's certain things that have to be the same, that always have to be in place. It has to be comprehensible input. There has to be enough of it, points of reference in there for you to understand what's going on, even if you don't understand everything. But it also, the key is, and this is what makes it different for everybody, is it has to be something that's compelling. You have to actually care about what the content you're exposing yourself to. If it's boring you, if you have to force yourself to watch it or read it or whatever, then you're never going to get anywhere, because all your energy is going towards forcing yourself to read some shit that you don't care about.
so many things, right? For example, what we see with Speakly when researching literally thousands of people is that many people who are on upper intermediate levels, they have the speaking block, right? It's a very usual.
Yes.
It's very usual.
Which is a normal thing as well. There is a silent period. We have it with our native languages too. When we're first learning language, there is a period in which we're understanding a fair bit, but we really have not advanced to the point where we can put it all together to produce it actively, because that's a very complicated thing. You need more you actually need more of the language in order to produce it. than you do in order to start passively understanding it. That's a different level of being able to sort of manipulate the structures of the language and spontaneously come up with the words you need and things like that. And and much of the language instruction that I've seen in schools really tries to push you to speak really early, and gives you the idea that if you're not speaking by a certain period of time, really, really early on, that you've somehow failed, and that's just nonsense. It is absolute crap. The people are going to take time to get to the point where they can actually speak. That is invariably the case, and for some people it will be longer, for some people it will be shorter. And forcing it is about the worst thing you can do, and making somebody feel like they have failed because they haven't actually reached that level. It would possibly happen. Maybe they just are going to take longer, which is fine, because people learn things at different paces. That's just kind of normal. That's just kind of normal. That's not a thing that anyone should be made to feel bad about or like marked down for. People learn at different paces, and it could very well be that the materials they have are suboptimal. They may very well have materials that are kind of helping, but they're just not quite best, and maybe helping them find some stuff that is more suited to them and their interests in that will make a big difference. It is so already making people feel like they have failed because they're just not speaking yet, often very early on in the process. You've been learning it for a couple of years maybe. I mean, like, that is just one of the worst things you can do. There's so many aspects of the way this stuff is taught in schools that is just the worst possible way of doing it.
So now with research, where does it come from? It's literally so visible that it really directly comes from the fact that we are graded in school.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
So basically you have to make a choice. Do I make a mistake, which would be a normal thing as a human being in everything, or I won't make a mistake and I won't say anything? Which is how we are programmed, which is the craziest thing ever.
Yeah.
Right? Because like, what I usually talk about as an example is people just remembering, how did I speak, how did I learn my mother tongue? Was my mother at my bedside every evening being like, this conjugation, well, this goes like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and you have it sorry, have a silent period there too. Like, I mean, and some of us have a pretty long one. Mine was fairly long. I think it was like 3 before I started speaking anything. But after I hit that point, I kind of never shut up, and I still haven't. So people, so having a long silent period doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with you. It may be something wrong with the materials you're using, the methods you're using. But you shouldn't be made to feel bad because you're not quite at the point where you can spontaneously crap out something in your target language. That takes a lot of time. That is a whole next level thing. And forcing people into situations where they have to talk is not actually, there's no evidence that actually helps people learn to speak. Quite the contrary, it can actually shut them down, as they're saying right there.
So,
because getting corrected doesn't help
as
either.
As you were saying, a healthy environment filled with
makes you feel bad.
And language input, right? Just creating the environment that needs these skills. And there are so many things we can go on about. But there is, there are some cool things happening. But in general, in the education systems, the things that are used are literally 100 and 200 years old. Right.
Yes, they are.
And they're often based on, like, a lot of these methods, they'll be like, oh, we validated them in studies. And then you look at the studies. I had this seminar on second language acquisition back when I was at uni a long time ago. And what we did was we looked at the officially sanctioned methods, and then we looked at the studies that were used to validate these methods. And the studies invariably had nothing to do with language acquisition, and it was like there would be tiny sample sizes, and it would be all just very arbitrary, very contrived bullshit that is scenarios. And you know, and they would use this, and they'd say, "This is why our method is great," and it's like, no, your method sucks. The study does not actually help there because we've got a handful of people who managed to learn a made-up word list. That doesn't mean anything.
I think that the newest additions to language lessons are like interactive boards or something, but still the methodology is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So using a device that is interactive, but the underlying thing is the same, which is funny.
You would be much better off
You know, we have done
seeking out
research, for
YouTube
example,
videos
in
on
such
stuff
a
that
thing
interests you
that
in your target
looking at
language.
a random, just a learning manual. Let's say Spanish A1 language learning book. So
Oh, this is
what we
annoying.
see is that there is a consistent rule happening that throughout these learning manuals, there are actually words and sentences that are not needed in this specific level because they are put together as a topic, right? So even on this granular level.
Yeah, and let me just say, the concept of these levels is often very arbitrary too. I mean, for one thing, if you listen to native speakers speak, they often do not perfectly acquire a lot of the rules that are used in these sort of often very rules-based teaching methods. I mean, Germans, if you listen to German native speakers speak, when you look at when the gender of nouns where it's not immediately apparent, because there's a whole bunch of nouns where you could not immediately guess what their gender is just based on the word ending. And you find they actually fuck that up. Native speakers get that wrong all the time. You know, and certain rules about tenses and things like that, prescriptive grammar rules. That's stuff that native speakers get wrong all the time. There are some prescriptive rules of French that native speakers overwhelmingly do not use themselves, like the way the past participle is supposed to take the gender of the direct object. Like if you listen to native French speakers, they don't do that for the most part. It is actually rare. You're probably more likely to find like second language speakers getting that, following that rule than you would find native speakers, because for the most part nobody pays any attention, nobody cares. So like correcting people and all these rules and things like that, the level at which you acquire these things is going to very much depend on what you're using. And there's passive acquisition and there's active. Like if I'm just sitting here, I might start to work out, okay, that Lestiermak ending keeps on showing up in situations where it seems to suggest making something or turning something from one thing into another. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I can actively and correctly use it every time, because I'm still building my repertoire of the ways in which that's being used through passive exposure to it.
These things are not thought out and kind of enrage me in a way that how can this be in such a way that we are just spending